based upon economic value. Do I like it? Do I enjoy myself? Does the school have a good reputation for whatever it is I want to do? But none of it's about is the value. The analogy I use in town hall meetings all the time is about how opaque college bills are. So, and I use the schools my kids go to as an example. In Notre Dame's bill, there's 3 lines. It says tuition, room and board, other fees. And it's $61,750.
A year?
A year. And I said, if you went out for dinner at a restaurant after the town hall meeting, and 4 of you went out, and the bill came back and it said food $100 for things bunched into that number, and you don't have the choice about whether I want to pay for this or I don't want to pay for certain things. So I think that the lack of market forces on this is the biggest reason why tuition goes up.
So what does the President of the United States do about that?
I think that what the President of the United States could do is say, listen, if you want to participate in federal student loan programs and student grant programs, then you need to be much more transparent in terms of what you're spending your money on to the consumer, not to the government, to the consumer. And I would advocate allowing unbundling of those costs. And so that if you're a kid who wants to go to school and really is just going to go to school and do your classes and leave and not participate in the other parts of it, that's your choice, you should only have to pay for those portions. That would be a great market test on which of the other things that people are not choosing, are they really necessary? What if 75 or 80% of people said, I don't need that? Well, that's a great market test for the fact that you shouldn't be spending or investing money in that. And I think the only hammer you have is participation in the federal student loan and grant programs. I think it's a hammer that you could use in order to force them, because nothing else is forcing them to be more transparent or to allow us to pay for it in different ways.
You said terrorism, homeland security, which is interesting because that's come up second so far in the questions we've asked of readers for the Voters First Forum next week. What particularly concerns people with that?
There's a variety of different questions and different ways they answer it. There's a lot of questions on ISIS and what would your approach to ISIS be. There are a number of questions that touch on border security as well and how that plays into homeland security. And then there are a number of questions about Iran. And every once in a while you get a question about Russia, although that's probably of those categories. ISIS, the Iranian stuff has now become really prominent. Border things and how that may affect national security and homeland security. And then Putin.
So here's a softball for you, Governor. You got 14, 15, 16 pretty good candidates out there. What differentiates you, besides being a federal prosecutor, but what differentiates you on homeland security and terrorism where you would do a better job than the other guys and gals?
Well, see, I don't think it's fair, Joe, to say beside being a federal prosecutor. That's like, beside leaving half your brain at home.
Beside leaving half your brain.
Yeah, I can't answer it that way. I mean, it's
answer it the way you want.
It's indivisible from my experience. I mean,
and how does that federal prosecutorial experience inform you that much more than a governor of Texas like Perry, who's dealt with homeland issues?
Yeah, because as governor, you really don't deal with homeland issues all that much. I mean, you don't. You have a homeland security advisor. That homeland security advisor, at least in my experience with most of the governors, has as much to do with preparedness as they do to have to do with really the strategy of protecting the homeland. It's so federalized at this point that the state's operations are really just a small part of the larger federal operation.
So what was it as federal prosecutor that gives you this insight that allows you to be better, you say, as president than the other guys?
Because I'm the only guy who's going to be standing up there who's actually used the Patriot Act, not just read about it in a book.
How do you use it?
Well, used it to investigate terrorists. And brought the first major terrorism case post 9/11 using the Patriot Act, and then brought another very big case, the Fort Dix 6 case, that we brought against 6 homegrown, home radicalized terrorists in both Philadelphia and New Jersey who had come up with a plot to attack Fort Dix and kill American servicemen and women. We interdicted the plot beforehand. We arrested them on the evening that they bought black market weapons, and they're spending, 5 of the 6 of them are spending the rest of their life in jail.
Now, you didn't do that all by yourself. Where do you come in as federal prosecutor, and what decisions do you make?
You oversee the entire operation. The FBI does the investigatory part of it, but they don't get anything like search warrants or the other things without coming through us. And on a case of that level, I had to sign off and review all of that. before it went to court, before it went either to the FISA court, if it was foreign intelligence, or to our local district court, if it was a search warrant for a domestic issue. All those things have to come by my desk. I have to be briefed, review them, approve them, and it requires the U.S. Attorney, him or herself, to sign off on it, given the nature of the request. So, it's not one of those things where I had a bunch of other people doing all the work and I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't put the raid jacket on and go and do the raid, but the FBI did that. But I authorized the raid and authorized the search warrants that went along with it. So, my involvement in the terrorism end of things, and I think if you talk to any U.S. attorney in a place that was a hotbed for radical activity, like the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area was, they would tell you that you had to have intimate involvement, and the Justice Department, at least under Ashcroft, required that we did. He wanted us to.
Now, that was then and this is now. I don't know what level of knowledge you have now versus then, but from what the news reports are, it just keeps ramping up and ramping up. Were you surprised back then by the level of sophistication of these people? Or?
No, because back then, remember, I got nominated on September 10th, 2001. So,
nice timing.
Yeah, good timing. So, for me, it was the height of things when I walked in the door, in the height of our own turn towards dealing with law enforcement issues differently. Remember, before 9/11, federal law enforcement's attitude was, when a crime's committed, we investigate it, we catch the bad guys, we put them in jail. After 9/11, the mandate from President Bush was, too late, got to interdict. That was, I don't think people really understand or appreciate well enough what a complete sea change that was in the FBI and in the minds of federal prosecutors, that you're now going in and trying to catch things before they happen rather than fixing a problem after the fact. And so we were in the midst of our own huge transformation then, in terms of our mindset and our approach, and the number of people you needed to do that was significantly more. And in addition, then it was learning how to disrupt these networks and to get this intelligence in a different way than you'd ever done before. The only thing that it was kind of akin to was investigations of organized crime a little bit, because that was an ongoing enterprise where you would be attempting to get in before things got worse. But it was much different in the respect that you're dealing with a lot more foreign activity here than you ever dealt with organized crime.
And is it your sense that that level of foreign activity has increased since you were in that office?
I think it's been like a roller coaster. I think it increased when I came into the office and continued to increase for a period of time. Then I think we had a good bit of time where it started to go back down again, and Al-Qaeda, which was the predominant concern then, started to come back down. But I think you've now seen in the last few years an increase, ISIS being one of the things that's manifested itself. Al-Qaeda has not gone away. And I think you're starting to see activity go back up again. And so I think there was a time with some very tough direct law enforcement intervention where we were able to disrupt the networks enough that we brought down the level even of chatter. Forget conduct, but even the level of chatter. Now, my sense is, although I'm not briefed to the same level now that I was when I was U.S. Attorney, obviously, we still get a decent amount of briefing as governor, but not as much as when I was U.S. Attorney. My sense is that the activity is ramping back up. And I think we see some of that, in activities that have gone on in the country.
And what would you be doing differently from what you see that the current administration is doing?
Well, first off, I wouldn't have signed a paring back of the Patriot Act. And I think that what they did in Congress and what the president permitted is going to prove over a course of time, it may not be next week, maybe next month, maybe next year, it's going to prove to be a problem in terms of our ability to be able to effectively interdict these things. So I would not have signed off on that. I would have fought it and I would have vetoed it if I had to. Secondly, I think we have to have a different approach from the Attorney General. There was no question in our minds that we had essentially three bosses. When you're a U.S. Attorney, the Deputy Attorney General, the Attorney General, and the President. And there was absolutely no question in our minds what our assignment was and what our mission was with President Bush and Attorney General Ashcroft and Deputy Attorney General Thompson and then Comey. It was to be as aggressive as we needed to be within the law to be able to disrupt these networks and do what we needed to do. I don't get the same sense from this Justice Department, that that's been their mission. And so from my perspective, one, it would be making a very clear point from the President's office about exactly what we expected from our law enforcement folks and our intelligence community, which we haven't touched on yet. And then secondly, to appoint an Attorney General who was going to be able to have the same effect on, his or her people. Ashcroft was outstanding at this. I worked for General Ashcroft for 4 years, and he talked to us about it all the time. He focused it when we needed resources. He made sure we got them, and he kept a very clear, direct message to us about what he expected us to be doing and spending our time on. So I think the second part is an Attorney General that's really strong. And then third is more support for our intelligence community. I think what the Senate did at the end of last year, issuing that report, excoriating the intelligence community, it was a partisan report, and I think it was false you forget about it being ill-advised from a morale perspective. It was false, I think, factually. But our intelligence community, we need to have more intelligence officers in the field. I don't think we have enough human intelligence capability on the ground. The field is all over the world, and we don't have enough human intelligence around the world to be able to do the things we need to do. Iran is a perfect example of that. We don't have enough intelligence to know. We're having this big discussion now in the last 24, 40 hours. Are we going to know really what the extent of Iran's nuclear program was? Well, we should have already known that. And if we had sufficient aggressive intelligence capability, we would have. And I don't think this president's invested in it. And I don't think he takes it seriously enough. And on top of it, he's now permitted, through the paring back of the Patriot Act and certain conduct of the NSA, he's pared back our ability to be able to get real-time intelligence. If you think for a second you're going to get phone numbers from a cell phone company faster than if the NSA had it, everybody's living in another world. It's not their first priority. The first priority is their shareholders, and that's what they're going to do. And this whole idea, this is a typical Washington thing. Well, we don't want to do this, but we don't want to seem like we're totally abandoning things. So we're going to require the phone companies, we're going to require the private sector to do this for us and put a regulation on them to do it. I can tell you that they're just not going to see this top priority. When I pick up the phone and say, I want this information, we'll get back to you. And we'll see how long it's going to take. If that information is housed at the NSA and we have a match between a terrorist phone number from outside the country and a domestic cell phone or landline number, then they're going to have the ability right away to go to a U.S. attorney, to go to either the Foreign Intelligence Court or the U.S. District Court, depending upon which one applies, and get a search warrant quickly based on probable cause and be able to move on it. If we're waiting for the phone company to get back to us in 30 days, 15 days, however long it takes, that's going to be a problem. So I think knowing more funding, more human intelligence, and more aggressive tools from a statutory perspective are all things that we need to protect against the evolving threat.
On the other side of that is the question of civil liberties and a government which we have seen in so many areas screw up things royally. But you're confident that we need to have the NSA looking at everybody's phone records.
They're not looking at everybody's phone records. Let's stop.
What are they doing?
They're collecting it. They're collecting it, and then they have computers and programs which look for matches. Right? So they're not looking at it. They don't know who you're calling until and unless you have a match with a phone number that is connected with a terrorist.
Well, they say it's connected with the terrorist.
Well, okay, so listen.
I yield to my friend Drew, who.
Well, Governor Christie and I have already had this conversation.
Yeah. And I just
Well, have either of you changed your position? Because that would be news for Dan for tomorrow.
It would. No, I don't think so. But and one thing that we've talked about is, as Joe said, you can be a suspected terrorist or suspected associate, right? Or you can go to one of those countries and get your number on the list, and they make mistakes on the list. But
sure.
But aside from that, I think the bigger concern is we just had a guy in Chattanooga. Right? We've had incidents. We know the FBI is now saying domestic is a new field, so to speak. Right? That ISIS is trying to recruit people, they're trying to get people in it. So I think the next big question is, what limits should the NSA or the federal government in general, the President of the United States, set on collecting data and records associations from American citizens. I mean, what you have to identify, right? So we don't have the list of all known terrorists or all future terrorists, right?
No, we don't.
So you're going to have to identify who the terrorists are going to be, which means you're not going to be only looking at people who you know are terrorists.
No,
right?
you're not. No, you're not going to. This is not a crystal ball thing. You're not looking to say, you look like you might be a terrorist, or you sound like. There has to be some proof of conduct, and it's not trying to predict who's going to be a terrorist. It's who's taking activity or engaged in associations with known terrorists, which raise suspicion. And I think that's an absolutely valid thing for the government to be involved in. And I guarantee you that the very same people who are being critical of this, when there is the next attack, if there is someone who had associations with terrorists, and we said, well, based upon a very, very broad reading of civil liberties, we decided not to pursue this, they'll have that guy or woman up on Capitol Hill under oath excoriating them for not having connected the dots. So, my view is, I think what the American people want is for their lives to be protected. And if there's someone, whether it's at the FBI or the NSA or the CIA, who's going over the line, there's two avenues to pursue. One is congressional oversight, and there should be vigorous congressional oversight. And they have subpoena authority. They can do whatever it is they want up there to be able to get to the bottom of these things. Instead of, having, stem-winding speeches in the Senate and then cutting it and putting it to raise money from civil libertarians, maybe what you should do is engage in the oversight process. And secondly, there's the Justice Department to be able to investigate people who are going over the line. And there's whistleblower protection available to those folks who believe that there are folks who are going over the line. I don't believe you take away the capability because you could come up with one instance or two instances where someone didn't follow the law. Well, that would be like taking away any other tool law enforcement has because you've had a rogue cop or a rogue agent. You deal with the rogue cop or rogue agent. You don't take away the authority. And we live in a dangerous, dirty world. And we should, get real about that, in my view. And so I don't have any hesitation about it. I saw it work in the Bush administration. I saw it work effectively. And we didn't go 7 years without an attack on this soil after September 11th by accident. And I have not heard yet of any type of egregious civil liberties violation that happened during those period of years that would necessitate the taking away of that authority.
Governor, what's the toughest question you've had on the campaign trail so far? I mean, anything that's taken you aback or that you've gone back and said, that's a good question, I've got to come up with a better answer?
Listen, I think the biggest problem the country has that's difficult to answer is how you deal with $18 trillion in debt. Now we all have theories about it, and mine include not only containing spending, but economic growth and having to grow the country at 4% rather than 2%, so that you can grow your way out of some of that debt. But I think that the biggest issue the next president's going to have from an economic perspective is how to deal with the issue of this debt, and how do you avoid becoming Greece, and how do you tell hard truths to people? I mean, so I'm up here talking about entitlement reform and stuff like that, and some people get dismayed over that, but we have to have those conversations. So I think there are no easy answers to 18 trillion in debt, and I think that's the hardest thing. And the thing I keep going back to the people who advise me and saying, what more should we be talking about? What more should we be thinking about from the spending side of things and from the growth side of things? I think, it's not necessarily the hardest particular question in the way someone phrases it, but I think it's the most difficult problem.
Now, you were laying out a series of speeches on particular issues.
Yep.
You started out with a big enchilada of entitlements.
Yep.
Right? And then you did, what was your second?
Second one, we did tax and regulatory reform. Third, we did the military and the national intelligence agencies. Fourth, we did education reform. And then about 10 days ago, we did criminal justice reform.
And of those, what was the biggest response, plus or minus, where people were interested to the level you expected, or were you surprised?
Entitlement reform's the thing they're most interested in because it raises the most emotion on both sides. Because there's also lots of people who I've seen in town hall meetings in New Hampshire who, when I start talking about it, they're nodding their heads. They're like, "You're right. We have to do this." And then there are some people who will stand up and give you a hard time about it. Many more people are positive about it in the town hall forums than are negative. I think that's just the nature of the crowds being more fiscally conservative and more
Yeah.
conservative in general than they are more liberal. But and then the second would be the national security side of things. Like I said before, I think that's people have a lot more interest in that now. And the military, you'll get questions from veterans here about the Veterans Administration, but just as much about the military and the level of military spending and investment we're making now.
Part of your plan is asking people to work longer before they can collect Social
Yep.
Security. Have you had any response from younger people, positive or negative, about that idea?
Positive, most of them. Younger people get this really quickly because they realize they're the ones that are getting shafted. So they get it. Like, so if we don't do something, Social Security's not going to be here for me, and I'm paying into it now every other week, and it's not, forget about I'm going to get less, I'm going to get nothing unless something changes. So younger people react really positively to it generally, where it's pretty demographically what you would expect. As people get a little bit older, they start to get more and more concerned about whether they want to work longer and all the rest of that. So, but the younger people, they completely get it. In fact, I've had a few people come up to me after meetings up here. One guy I remember in particular who just came up to me and said, I'm 25 years old. I just started working for the last 2 years after I got out of college. Thanks for bringing this up, because every time I see that FICA deduction on my pay stub, it drives me crazy because I know I'm never going to get Social Security. And that's his attitude. He was not angry about it. It wasn't an emotional thing. It was just a very matter-of-fact statement on his part that he is absolutely convinced and says he's planning that he won't have Social Security, that he's got a plan for his own retirement completely. So it's kind of interesting response. That's what I get from most younger people. Most younger people get it. They want you to do something about it. The older people get, the more skittish they are about it.
Do you think that the country overall is moving to a direction where we're just talking about 401ks and the government is not involved?
No, I think there's always going to be some type of social safety net that the government sets up, and I think Social Security is the best example of that. But what you have to do is be honest with people, and what I've said to folks is Social Security should be just that. It should be there as a security net for you so that you don't grow old in poverty. And it should be like homeowners insurance. You hope your house doesn't burn down, but if it does, we're going to be there to rebuild it. Social Security should be the same thing in my view. It should be for those who need it the most, who have worked and paid in, and who need it the most at the end of their lives, so they don't have to choose between rent and food or heat. But I think we need to have a mindset change towards Social Security. That what Social Security is really about is providing for those who need it the most. And that's why I also talked about means testing in the entitlement reform stuff. Because if you make over $200,000 a year in retirement income from investments that you have, not your home, but from liquid investments, you don't need Social Security. You don't need it. And getting that monthly check doesn't change your standard of living much at all, if at all.
New Hampshire trivia. Who was the first director of Social Security?
Don't know.
Governor of New Hampshire.
Really?
Yep. Progressive Republican, who FDR then tapped
To run Social Security?
Social Security, and then he became our ambassador to Britain when Joe
Oh,
Kennedy.
Wyman.
Yep.
Wyman.
John Wyman.
I knew him in the capacity as the ambassador to Great
Did you
Britain
read
after
that
Joe
book?
Kennedy. I didn't read the book, but I got a real long, interesting article that somebody sent me about him
Yeah.
that I read about. But I didn't know the article didn't touch it. It touched all on his time in Europe and the style he brought over there following Joe Kennedy, etc. But it did not touch on the Social Security part of things. Just on the time as ambassador.
Governor, in Iowa, you had that very interesting exchange on gun rights and your Second Amendment street cred.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on where you stand on that? And a follow-up question would be, how do we make American schools safer, given the violence and the school shootings over several years?
Well, listen, I think first, I'll start with the last part first. On school shootings, listen, I think each school district should have to make the determination as to what level of security they need to be able to secure our children. And based upon their own track record on violence, they're going to have to make their own decisions. That certainly should not be something that the President of the United States should be deciding. How I would know, what they need here in the Manchester school system versus what they need in the Dubuque, Iowa school system versus what they need in the Charleston, South Carolina school system, to me is just typical federal overreach, and I don't think the president should be involved in that, or the Congress, for that matter. That's what we have local school boards for. and local governing bodies. Let them decide how to best secure their schools. And I think they have an obligation to do that because parents send your children there believing that they're going to go into an environment that's safe and nurturing for them to be able to learn. But those should be local decisions. Those should not be federal decisions, in my opinion, and not even state decisions for the most part. Those should really be down to the locality who understands what the particular challenges and opportunities are in that particular school system. On the larger issue, my back and forth with the guy, first of all, this was a guy who, was there spoiling for a fight. So that's fine. I'm used to that. So I'm more than happy to have the fight. But my point to him is the same point I'd make to anybody else. Like, if somebody wants to show me something in my time as governor that has been anti-Second Amendment, I'm happy to see it. But I don't think you're going to find it. Fact is that I've pardoned people who I felt were convicted or arrested and charged in a way that did not represent justice under gun laws that I think in my state are overreaching in certain respects. And I vetoed a number of different things over time. The ban of the 50 caliber rifle, the reduction of the magazine capacity from 15 to 10, a statewide ID card system. I vetoed all those things over the course of my nearly 6 years now as governor. So I believe that we should be focusing on going after criminals who commit crimes with guns. That's what we did when I was U.S. Attorney. That's what we should be doing. I do not think we need more new laws. We got plenty of laws on the books now to be able to take care of people who conduct themselves illegally. And I don't think our focus should be on folks who are either getting their weapons for self-defense or for hunting or for collecting, which is, when these laws get much too broad, is what happens. So, I recognize, though, that people have an image of my state, and rightfully so, of being one that's really restrictive on gun rights. But all those things happened before I got there. And I had a Democratic legislature for the last 6 years who, rather than looking for ways to be able to be more respectful of the Second Amendment, have looked for ways to be even more liberal on these issues, and I vetoed those things. So, it takes some time for people to get to know that. People in New Hampshire will get to learn that. They're smart. They'll listen to the record and not the rhetoric, and that's my job. So part of what I was doing there, and part of the reason I had the back and forth with the guy was I said, listen, I'm not going to let you sit here in front of 100 people in Iowa and characterize my record in a way that's incorrect. I said, give me one example, and he couldn't give me one. So
I have two follow-up questions
Yeah.
there. Do you think members of the military, Army, Navy should be able to be allowed to carry
Yes.
weapons on? And then as governor, what have you done, if anything, and sorry if I missed it, but to allow New Jersey National Guard members to?
what I've said to my Adjutant General of the National Guard is, if he believes there is a need for his folks to get any authority from me that he needs to protect themselves, he should come to me with it. But I'm going to leave that decision to the person who's in charge of the National Guard on the troop level, which is the Adjutant General. But General Kniff knows, and I've told him, that if there's anything he thinks we need to do, and that's not just carrying a weapon, but a broad range of things since I've been governor, especially given my experience with the planned attack on Fort Dix when I was U.S. Attorney. If there's anything he needs to protect the safety of our National Guardsmen and women, he needs to just come and ask. And as long as it's reasonable, I'll do it. As president, I would authorize our men and women in uniform to carry a sidearm. It seems to me that if we trust them with the most lethal and dangerous weapons that man's ever invented, the idea that we don't trust them with a firearm, when it's clear now, it should have been before, that given the nature of the fight that we're in, they become a target just by wearing our country's uniform, then, I'm not worried about an Army soldier or a Marine or a sailor carrying a weapon. I don't think that'll be a problem.
So, Governor, as president, you would authorize the military to be able to carry sidearms here.
Yes, sir.
But as governor, and therefore head of the National Guard, you wouldn't authorize it. You'd throw it back to the National
No,
Guard.
I wouldn't authorize it. He's authorized. If he wants it, he can have it. The same way as president. I
Well,
would
okay, so
authorize
you
it.
would
I would
author-
authorize
but
it,
you wouldn't require it.
I wouldn't require it. No, I'd let the folks who run the day-to-day operations of the military come to me and tell me what they think is necessary
Yeah.
for the protection of the soldiers and the Marines and the sailors under their charge. And they'd be authorized to do what they wanted to do. Now, if I disagreed with their decision, as the civilian head of the military, I could always impose what I wanted. But I think the right way to talk about this is you would authorize them to do it. Again, this is a safety, this is a strategic decision. and one that the President of the United States should give the full authority to his generals to be able to do. And if you disagree with your generals, then you go ahead and do it. The question was, would I authorize it? The answer is yes.
But don't you think it's a no-brainer? You said all these guys are authorized to have the toughest weapons in the world.
I do, Joe, but I also want to be the type of commander-in-chief who's going to sit and listen to your generals too. And I'd listen to them. I'd give them the authority. I severely doubt that if I gave them the authority, they wouldn't exercise it. I think we're talking about how many angels on the head of a pin right now. I don't think generals would say, I don't want my men and women carrying a sidearm. So I think because remember, what was taken away before was back at the end of the Bush 41 administration was the authority for these folks to be able to do it. I would reissue that authority.
Okay.
And when they had the authority before, they carried. So I think we know where this would go.
Angels on the head of a pin.
Yeah.
There were at least 16 bona fide candidates for the Republican nomination running in New Hampshire. How many percentage points do you need to be the winner coming out of New Hampshire?
If there's all 16 stay, I don't know. Anywhere between 20 and 25% probably wins.
That much?
Yeah, I think you probably have to get to 20 to 25 wins for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, if there's all 16 around, I don't think all 16 will be here, but
Okay. Secondly, speaking of all 16, Fox has 10, and then they have the unfavored on at 5 o'clock or something.
Yeah.
And you are somewhere on the bubble.
I'm in. Don't
Are
worry
you
about
in?
it. Yeah.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
When did that happen?
No, I'm just telling you, I'll be there. I'll be on the stage.
Okay, and you'll be on the 9 p.m. stage?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You'll also be at the forum on
As you
a
know,
week from Monday? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely good.
absolutely, we'll be there. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
And listen, I think people should get as many opportunities as they can to see all of us.
That's the point of the primaries. Yeah.
That's why I'm here. That's why this is my 16th trip to New Hampshire since January, so I want people to see me as much as they can. If they see me, I do fine.
Just a clarifying point on that stuff. Is it your view, do you believe that Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms versus the collective kind of?
Yeah, the militia question? Yeah, I do.
That was my question, so.
Yeah, yeah, I believe it's an individual right, not just a militia.
So, we're just thinking about that being a sort of an issue that conservatives have with you sometimes. Are there other things that are just kind of driving you crazy from the conservatives get wrong about Chris Christie, right? That conservatives say, well, I can't vote for Christie because he's X, or he says this or does this. Are there things that you want to say, look, no, that's not me?
No, well, listen, I think it's the characterization of being a moderate. That characterization comes from where I'm from, not what I've done. I think they don't think there could be a conservative Republican from New Jersey, but they're wrong. And if you look the way I've governed in terms of cutting spending, cutting taxes, vetoing income tax increases, reforming teacher tenure, taking on the teachers union, I mean, all these things I did first. Before any of the other guys in this race took this stuff on. I took it on. And, many of them followed my example of what I did, because just of the way that the election years work in New Jersey, and I had a year head start on everybody else. So, I took this stuff on well before other folks did. But when you're from New Jersey, not from, let's pick a state where we don't have a candidate, and you're not from Mississippi, okay? If I had the very same record I have in New Jersey, in Mississippi, I would be called a conservative Republican governor. Because I'm from New Jersey, they say, well, he's a moderate. I am. I'm the first pro-life governor ever elected since Roe versus Wade. I vetoed, everyone's talking about Planned Parenthood funding now. I love these guys from Congress. They're all talking about it theoretically. I vetoed Planned Parenthood funding out of the budget 6 years ago. And I vetoed it 7 times since then. Because they not only sent it to me every year in the budget, but they have twice sent me side bills, supplemental bills authorizing Planned Parenthood funding. I got rid of it in my first year as governor. So, I don't understand how that's moderate. To be a pro-life governor who 6 years ago said, I don't want Planned Parenthood funding in my budget, vetoed it. It stood up on the front steps of the courthouse, was the first governor ever to address the pro-life rallies in January. It wasn't like I was in the State House hiding. saying I'm pro-life, but psst, don't tell anybody, you know? I mean, I'm out there and I give my views.
No, I thought you got your position because that's a good talking point based on the pro-life movement these days. I read the front page of the New York Times this morning.
Yeah, apparently.
That's where you came about it.
That's, well, you know, it's funny. I learned all kinds of stuff about myself in the New York Times. But so it's not a micro issue. It's a more macro issue for me, is this characterization as a moderate, which I think has much more to do with my geographic location than it has to do with anything that I've done or not done as governor. Because when you go through the checklist of things that conservatives say they care about, you've got a pro-life, pro-law enforcement, pro-tax cut, pro-spending cut, pro-limit the size of government conservative in a state which is, if not the bluest state in the country, in the top 3 with New York and California. And we haven't elected a Republican to the U.S. Senate in 42 years. It's the longest streak of any state in the country not to elect a Republican to the U.S. Senate. So this is a really blue place, and I've done all those things. So, you know.
We have a follow-up question, and we have readers, voters,
Yeah.
watching on Periscope, and they're sending in questions. And before I ask this is a good follow-up, but before I ask the question, I just want to let you know that Mr. Trump says he brings ratings, but you're actually beating him with the number of people watching. So.
Good, make sure you tell him that next time he comes to town.
So this person is asking how, considering that New Jersey is they call it a solidly blue state, how that influences your leadership style, sort of on a top level.
Yeah, the way it influences it is I wake up every morning knowing I'm not going to get everything I want. And so I've got to figure out ways to do a 2-step, right, as a leader. I have to be able to use the bully pulpit to be able to advocate for my position so that I'm in the best possible position I can be in when I do the second step, which is sit down and negotiate with the Democrats in the legislature to actually get something done. And so the idea of compromise, which has apparently gone out of vogue in Washington in any respect at all, because people view it as capitulation. There's 2 different words because it's 2 different actions. Capitulation, we know what that is. That's just giving in. Compromise is about putting yourself in the best possible position you can be to get everything you can possibly get, but then wanting to bring things to a conclusion and govern and move is to then make compromises where you need to be able to bring the other side along. So from the New Jersey perspective, dealing with a solidly Democratic legislature for 6 years now, we still got teacher tenure reform done. We still cut business taxes $2.3 billion. I've still balanced 6 budgets in a row and line item vetoed probably somewhere close to $5-6 billion out of Democrat budgets when we haven't negotiated an agreement. Those are the things that being a blue state governor brings that none of the other folks in this race have, because every one of the other current or former governors has had a completely Republican legislature that they've worked with the entire time they were governor. And that's a different dynamic. It's, here's what I want, you send it down the hall, you get 95% if you want, they send it back stamped yes, you sign it, and everybody takes a victory lap together. And either the public likes what you're doing or doesn't like what you're doing, but the internal fighting is over a small sliver. In my state, the internal fighting is over the majority of things, not over the small sliver. And to be able to get things done is much more akin, I think, to the experience you're going to have in Washington. No matter who's controlling the Congress, they don't give the president anything easily, if they're your party or not. So that's what I think governing in a blue state has equipped me to do differently than some of the other folks in this race. And I think what differentiates me from the gubernatorial experience level, like Joe's question was on the prosecuting side, what differentiates me on national security, I think from the domestic side of things, what differentiates me is I've had to battle for everything I've had to get in New Jersey, use the bully pulpit, but also know how to bring people into a room like this, get them around the table, and get and forge agreement. And we've done that on a bunch of different things.
I want to ask you just a couple of quick hit questions, because there are a lot of questions, general stuff that people are just interested in. So Colorado legalizing marijuana, support it?
No way.
No? Would you appoint Democrats to cabinet positions?
You know, if there was a good Democrat who was willing to follow the things that I wanted to have done as president, sure, I'd consider that. I've done it as governor, I would consider it.
This person is wondering, I guess they saw you at WrestleMania a few years ago, and they're wondering if you're a wrestling fan.
I'm really not. I'm friends with the McMahons, and WrestleMania is a huge economic event, and we held WrestleMania at MetLife Stadium, so I did the kind of the intro for it, and I went to the event, but I'm not like a weekly watcher of WWE. I will watch on occasion because my 14-year-old son watches every once in a while, so I'll drop in on what he's watching, but I'm not a week-to-week WWE watcher.
Who's your favorite president?
Lincoln.
And I guess why?
Because I think he had the absolute toughest presidency you could possibly have, and he showed how to do both the things I just talked about, how to stand up and fight for the things he believes in, but also how to compromise and bring people back together.
Trent, stop asking all the good questions.
Here's the one. Well, last one. This is a good one. This just came in. If Mr. Trump wins the nomination and asks you to be his vice president, would you consider?
I can't imagine. Listen, I can't imagine. I've said this before. I said this 4 years ago with Governor Romney. I can't imagine anybody who would want me to be their vice president. I just don't think that I'm the type of personality that you look at and go, there'd be a perfect vice president. I just don't. So I don't see that. I don't see it. I would never say never to anything, because if you're trying to serve your country and help your party, you shouldn't say never to anything. I just find it hard to believe that anybody would ever ask me to be vice president.
Okay, Tui, there's the lead tomorrow.
That's like
Christie will serve Trump. Listen, Governor, how are you doing with the pension mess? Wasn't there court rulings involved?
We had a court ruling that we won that did two things. One, it upheld all the reforms that we put in place. So increased payments by employees, increased retirement age, increased penalty for early retirement, and no cost of living adjustments. All those were upheld by the court as constitutional. And the court also said that if the state does not have the money to make the full payment, that they cannot be required to raise taxes in order to make those payments. And that was the position I took all along. If we had the money to make the full pension payment without having to increase taxes, I'd be happy to make it. And I've made twice the amount of payments in terms of actual dollars into the pension system than any governor in history. I made $4.4 billion in payments in 5 years or 6 years into the pension system. The next closest person is John Corzine, who paid $2.1 billion in. So when I've had the money, I've put a good chunk of that money in a $30 billion budget into the pension system. But I'm not going to raise taxes on the people in New Jersey to be able to support a pension system that, and its very nature, even after those changes that we made, still needs to be changed more. I'll give you the perfect example. The average teacher in New Jersey, over their 30-year career, pays $186,000 for their pension payments and their health care benefits. $186,000 over 30 years. The average benefit they take out is $2.5 million. So it doesn't work. The math doesn't work. And even in my administration, we've gotten, every year except for this one, double-digit returns on our investments in the pension fund. Even so, you can't keep up. So what I've said to the unions is, let's sit down, and there's ways to do this. The best way to do it is to reduce the richness of their health benefits. Right now, teachers and other public employees in New Jersey get Platinum Plus health benefits, as characterized by Obamacare. They cost about $31,500 per employee. I said if we reduce those to gold level, we'd save $3 billion a year from the local to the state level. And I said I'd make the commitment to take that $3 billion in savings and constitutionally dedicate it to the pension. So that they get the money, they just get it in a different form. They're going to pay more for their health benefits or get a lesser benefit, but in return, every nickel of that money goes in. They won't do it. So if they want their pension system to go bankrupt, what I've said to folks who come to complain to me about it, so go complain to your union leaders, because they want everything. And the taxpayers are not going to pay for everything. So we were sustained by the court. It was a tough battle, but they not only sustained the fact that we didn't have to make the payment, if in fact, the full payment, if in fact what was required was to increase taxes to do so. And it's actually a good display, Joe, too, of the way I've changed the Supreme Court in New Jersey, because that was a 5-2 decision in our favor, where what they talked about was we have no business, meaning the judiciary has no business in telling the executive and legislative branches how to raise revenue and appropriate it. That's reserved to those two branches, not to ours. Believe me, That would not have been one of the previous decisions of the New Jersey Supreme Court. But 3 of the 5 people that were in that majority were appointed by me.
And how do you determine who you should appoint as a justice?
I sit down and have a conversation with the folks that I'm considering, and I want to get a feel from them on what they think the role of the judiciary is supposed to be. I don't suggest to them what it should be. I want to listen to them. And I ask them lots of different questions, not on specific topics, but in a generalized way about, and I look at what their writings have been before, if they've written before on it. But in the end, what I want are judges who understand that they're not there to make laws, that they're there to interpret laws, and they're not there to make law.
And you have a truth meter, you can figure out when...
You do the best you can.
Yeah.
There's nothing foolproof in this business. But this was the first big test of these people that I put on the court. And I think that they came through putting forward what I think is the right philosophy, which is, if you want to change these things, go to the executive and legislative branches and use the lawmaking process to be able to change it. You want a guaranteed payment into the pension system, then go and get a constitutional guaranteed payment. Go to the legislature, go to the voters, go to the governor and get them all to sign off on it. But it's not for the judiciary to say these things. The judiciary has a particular, based upon our Constitution, the debt limitation clause and a couple of other things. They're like, listen, we're constrained here. And constraint was not a word that was often used previously in the New Jersey Supreme Court. So I'm proud of the fact that 3 of the 5 people who voted yes on this were appointees of mine. But you have no guarantee on this. I mean, what I think you try to do is do the best research you can. I'm not a guy who is going to ask them specific questions about specific issues. I think that's the wrong thing to do, because they could not tell you the truth about that just as much as anything else. I want to hear them talk, because if you let them talk long enough, usually what they really think, unless they're master actor or actress, usually comes out.
You going to be able to keep yourself to 7 minutes next Monday night?
Well, those are the rules.
And
So I'm
you
gonna
wouldn't
have
break
to.
the rules.
Not knowingly, no. No. You want to give me a little bit more time, Joe? I'm more than happy to take a little more time. But yeah, no, we'll be able to keep ourselves
should be
prepared
good.
and ready. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be, it's good format, and it'll give everybody an opportunity to be able to speak their mind, and people get a feel for folks. So that's what really matters.
We got an astounding response of people who want to go to the thing, and we get an astounding response to people, not only here, but in the other states, who've ticked off issues that they want referenced. So we're going to form questions based on that.
Well, at least nobody can complain this time that they don't have enough candidates to choose from. When I came to New Hampshire 4 years ago, all I heard was people, when I came for Romney, I just heard people complain all the time, I don't like the field, there's not enough candidates. Now I come to New Hampshire and they're saying, there's too many of you guys. There's too many, it's too hard to choose, but this is part of the process to get them to choose, so.
There were a dozen back about 4 cycles ago. I was just looking up an old story, because we're doing a new book about the latest ones, and there were quite a number, but as you indicate, a couple of them dropped out just as the primary was happening, because they didn't.
Money will be an issue for some folks, and perception of support, and some people just grow tired of it. If you don't think you have a chance to win,
Yeah.
and you continue to have to grind away at it, that's hard. I think it's hard for anybody. It's hard to do. Listen, I was in Iowa this weekend. I left Friday morning at 6 a.m. for Iowa, got back Sunday at noontime. Then got on the plane at 10 o'clock this morning to come up here and be here for 3 days. And this is hard. It's hard work. You're away from your family a lot, and it's hard work. So you got to really not only be completely committed to wanting to do the job and believe you have something to offer, but I think you also in your heart have to believe you have a chance to win. And I think some folks will drop off as we go forward here because they just come to the conclusion that they don't.
I think you're right. Anything else, guys?
Yeah, I was just curious, it's January 2017, President Christie gets inaugurated. What are your top 3 priorities?
Stop
You- you-
asking these questions. What are we thinking for next week?
The top.
You just really,
all right,
you want to get done.
Yeah, listen, you're talking about January 2017, so here are the 3 things that I call my chief of staff in and say, all right, here are the 3 things I want. We should already have an action plan at this point from the transition, but I'll play along with the question. I look at the chief of staff and I say, here are the 3 things I want you to get me a plan for and how we're going to execute on this. Number 1 is to get tax and regulatory reform done. So I want a tax reform bill ready to go up to the Hill, and I want a plan on how we change the regulatory climate, both rescission of Obama executive orders, and rescission of Obama-era regulations through the rulemaking process. So that's number one that I want to plan on, because we've got to get the economy moving and give people hope that there's going to be a different path here. Second, I'd say to them, get to me right away meetings, personal meetings here in Washington or at Camp David with the following leaders. I want to see Netanyahu. I want to see Peña Nieto from Mexico. I want to see Harper from Canada. I want to see Great Britain. I want to see France. I want to see Germany. And I want to see Japan. And get those folks to Washington individually. I don't want to meet with them together. Get those meetings set in the next 100 days. I want to meet with all of them if it's possible in the next 100 days. We need to reset our alliances around the world and let them know that there's a new person here who's going to react and act very differently than Barack Obama did. And then third, I'm going to want a roadmap for how we introduce our entitlement reform plan. And so those would be the three things if I, dragged in this poor man or woman on the first full day of work on the 21st and said, here's what I want to see, by the end of next week. Plans on all three of these things. Those would be the three things. There'd be other stuff we'd have to get to at some point, but those three would be, I think, the most important thing. Sends a message to the world about the seriousness of our alliances around the world, because we have to start by rebuilding our friendships before we can begin to take on our adversaries, because we won't know how we're going to take on our adversaries until we know what allies we're going to have with us to be able to take on those adversaries. We've got to get the economy moving and provide more hope in this country and opportunity for young people. And then we got to secure our financial future. And the only way to do that is to start to work on entitlement reform quickly. So those would be the three things.
We had agreed before you came in here, we wanted to save all the questions for next week, so we were just going to ask you, how you doing, Governor?
Yeah,
And let it
no
roll
real,
from there.
the plan went to hell in a handbasket, didn't it, Joe?
Plans don't work. That's what Eisenhower said on D-Day.
Well, thank you for the time.
Oh, thank
Sit
you.
down with you
Governor.
guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. My pleasure.
No.
Good to see you
We
guys.
appreciate it. I think the people in New Hampshire do.
Thank you.
Right? You too. You can
Absolutely.